Welcome back to Fair's Fair, and today I'd like to not only double down on, but actually expand a comparison I make. I've mentioned this before, but a lot of the times people will bring up, well, what movies have you done or what stories have you written as some kind of backhanded insult that you can't criticize something unless you've made it yourself. Now, this is obviously a very stupid thing to say, and the go-to I always use is, I've never flown an airplane before, but if I see someone take off in an airplane, immediately corkscrew to the left and crash nose first into the ground, then I am capable of ascertaining that they did something wrong. And I was actually counterpointed on this by someone who claimed, well, it very well could have been the people who made the airplane. You don't know if the pilot did something wrong, which is a remarkably stupid point, because if the pilot is the director, then the people who made the plane are the writers. The people who made the story, which we are representing as an airplane, are responsible for every part of that flight, including the construction of the airplane. So if the airplane flips over and crashes into the ground, I can point out that that was a flaw and not supposed to happen. Whether it was a director's choice to make this go wrong, aka the pilot flipped the plane over, or a writer's choice, aka the writers made something into the script that simply could not be overcome by the director. It does not matter who made the mistake when you are analyzing the story. The story still crashed. But as a learning tool, I'd actually like to use that airplane flight metaphor. So put on your pretentious hats and get ready for some parallels. The stages of the flight, that is the takeoff, the flight itself, and the landing, can be compared to a story at every step. Allow me to explain in stages. First, the takeoff. I've mentioned this before. Hook time, the start of your story. You need to set up your world, you need to set up what you're doing, where you're going, and you need to give some kind of hint as to what the actual obstacle is, what you are going to be overcoming with the flight. Essentially, our destination. Where are we going with this story? You need to know that when you're taking off, and you have to do it within a certain amount of time. There is a runway, there is a limit, there is an amount of time where people are willing to invest their time in learning about your world. And most importantly, you have a story to tell, meaning you will eventually have to bring that up. That is your runway that you are taking off from. And if, like Highgardian Spice, you just hang out on the runway and cruise straight through, you're gonna end up running into the trees. It's gonna be awful. Not saying you can't bring up more important things later. I'm just saying that basic starting point important items are going to be needed. And if there's an antagonist, it's probably a good idea to give some kind of hint as to what that's going to be. Again, Highgardian Spice, they took so long to get into their story, and when they did, it was barely anything. They barely got the landing gear off the ground and then cruised crashing through treetops for a while until they finally decided to hit the real storyline and lift off the rest of the way. I referred to it as hook time, but then coincidentally, immediately after, I mentioned that I read about it in a book and couldn't find the book. Possum Reviews released a review of the remake of Ghostbusters, in which he mentions exactly what I was talking about.
And I'll be doing it through the lens of Frank Daniel's 8-sequence model, which is a common tool used to structure a screenplay for optimum pacing, in which, once it's pointed out to you, you will notice and be conscious of while watching every movie you ever see from now on, and you'll become a pedantic, overly analytical who nobody likes to hang out with, like me.
His video's definitely worth a watch. I recommend you see it, and also I'm still gonna call it hook time. I like that term. But after your story has taken off, now you have the other really important thing, the flight. You have to go from point A to point B. You are trying to get somewhere. It's great to see the sights along the way and have other things going on around you. You know, your in-flight movie, your little peanuts. Maybe there's a commotion with some lady who's taken a few too many nips off of the alcohol cart. Your side stories are definitely important, and they add to the world. They add to the flight. They add more to it than just, I am in a tube going from A to B. If you have no world around it and you have no side stories around it, then it's like a windowless flight with a blindfold on. Yes, you're still technically getting to the end, but it's not going to feel like an experience because you didn't have anything additional to it. This is where your character development happens. This is where your story development, your plot development, all of that happens. There's nothing more infuriating than large dead spaces of airplane rides where you're going in a completely unrelated direction to your destination and just wasting everybody's time along the way. Don't pad runtime. The Last Jedi did not need that trek to the gambling planet. In fact, despite the fact that they very clearly set up Finn to be the next Jedi, the Star Wars sequels didn't actually seem to need him at all. A large portion of that movie just wasn't useful. You could have filled that with better character progression. You could have filled that with better story progression. But back to our flight, ignoring how stupid their flight was. In our flight, plot holes and inconsistencies are like turbulence. Unpleasant upsets that can fuck up your flight or kill all the passengers. For the record, even if you arrive, if all of your passengers are dead, it's generally considered a failed flight. I'm not a pilot, but I do understand that survival of the passengers is generally considered an objective of the flight. But maybe that's just a subjective opinion of mine. On a similar note, shows like High Guardian Spice and The Last Jedi were like flying into the Bermuda Triangle in a hurricane on Friday the 13th during a blood moon solar eclipse. Actually no survivors. And like how the point of a flight is to reach the destination with your passengers alive, so too is it a story's objective to arrive with the plot lines and audience investment intact. And I say again, if someone pointing out plot holes is ruining the movie for anyone, it's proof that you weren't watching or thinking about the movie in the first place. If you couldn't enjoy it while knowing that these flaws were there, then you didn't actually like the movie. And now, the last and most important part, the landing. And I cannot stress enough how important the landing or the ending of your story is. Not just the end, but the entire final conflict and end. This is an outrageously important part of your story. There are some endings that you don't remember as well as the flight. There are sometimes mediocre endings or really good endings that made a strong impression on you. But something you never want is a bad ending, because while a mediocre ending will glaze through and they'll remember other parts of your story instead, that's totally fine. A bad ending is all they're going to remember. Does anyone remember how great Game of Thrones it was? Do you remember how beloved that series was? How that TV show was fucking amazing in so many goddamn ways? The answer is no. Almost everyone remembers how god awful the ending was. People who have never seen it, people who will never see or read or ever interpret your story in any way, shape, or form will know about it if your ending sucked. Because whether you like it or not, no matter what you try to do, sooner or later, you're going to land one way or the other.
This is the captain. We have a little problem with our entry sequence, so we may experience some slight turbulence and then explode. Can you see the vector?
I'm doing it. It's not enough.
I'll just get us on the ground.
That part will happen pretty definitely.
The landing is not just the end of your story, it's the ending of your story. It is the whole arc of the end of your story, which means, much like the takeoff, you have a runway limit before, people start to question why hasn't it ended yet. You will have to fade to black at some point. And the story you're trying to tell, from takeoff to flight to landing to maybe next takeoff for the next flight to the next landing, depending on whether or not you intend to sequel. And bear in mind, when you're talking sequels, these are more like stopover flights. Your destination is still the same thing and should still be the same thing. It's just that you've had a few stops along the way. Hence a trilogy. A trilogy is like having 2 stopovers, which honestly would be expensive as fuck, and if I'm going somewhere that far, what am I, orbiting the planet? But those stopovers could be, your sequels, your next season, or stuff like that. And I'm hoping that this is a good visual for you to have when it comes to a story. View a story in these sections. Obviously, the book that Possum Reviews brought up and that I still can't find my copy of lays them out considerably better, but if you're looking for the Cliff Notes version, what you put in your takeoff has to be relevant during the flight and has to be resolved by the landing. And let me know, was this a good visual for you? I know it's kind of a Cliff Notes of what someone else has said before. Like I've said before, I could go on for hours in some of these things, especially reviews, and I urge you that if you're looking to get into writing, look up some larger, more expansive breakdowns of these topics. But if you just need a casual reminder, I hope my video was at least somewhat helpful to you. Let me know what kind of video videos you want to see in the future down in the comments. Remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and follow me on Twitter, all of which are things that cost you literally nothing. In fact, it's completely free. Little known fact, Twitter is free. Not because they're charitable, but because there's no justifiable way you could ask money for Twitter. Hey, me from the past. It's me from the future calling. And I'd just like to say you're a fucking idiot, because NFT profile pictures just came out, so it turns out Twitter actually does have the audacity to ask money for something on their platform. Anyway, back to the video. And while I am aware that you don't necessarily have to do takeoff, flight, landing in that order, at least when it comes to a story, in the terms of actual plane flight, you should definitely do it in that order. But if you disagree and don't believe that a story needs to have a setup, a progression of events, and a conclusion, feel free to go down into the comments and explain that to me reasonably. Or if you don't want to do it reasonably, at the very least, be entertainingly angry.